Welcome to the Florida Divorce Podcast, your source for the information you need to successfully get through your divorce and into the next exciting chapter of life. Now, here's your host, Attorney Scott Kalish.
Hey everyone, this is Attorney Scott Kalish. I am a family law and divorce attorney here in South Florida. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about the consequences, right, or potential consequences of not paying your support obligation. Now, this is something that we see from time to time, right? People, sometimes don't pay their child support or don't pay their alimony obligation, and it's actually quite common. We see it all the time in our court system, and the reason for it obviously can vary from case to case, but some people have the money and don't want to pay, or there are legitimate things that happen, right? Life happens and the payments are not made, right? And there could be, some real defenses to that. But essentially what we see is when someone doesn't pay their obligation is we see the other person, right? The person that's owed the money, we see them filing a motion for contempt. And there are two different types of motions for contempt, right? There's a civil contempt and then there's also criminal contempt, and they're different. Actually very different, right? What you're asking for is very different, in a civil contempt versus a criminal contempt. So let me kind of give you an idea of the difference between the two. This is more of like a legal technicality, like nerd stuff, but it might be helpful, right? In terms of like how you're breaking this down and how you're thinking about this. But for civil contempt, what you're asking for is you're asking for the judge to order the other person to basically pay you, right? So you're basically getting an order with certain, like a mechanism to try and force them to pay you, right? So like an example would be, let's say that they have to pay you $1,000 a month in alimony and they didn't pay and they have the money, obviously, right? So for contempt, just across the board, there's got to be a willful violation of the order, right? Of the support obligation, meaning it's got to be an intentional violation, right? They have to have the money and just refuse not to pay, right? So my examples assume that the person has the money and they're just thumbing their nose at you, refusing not to pay. So with the civil contempt, you're basically asking the court for an order that implements some sort of mechanism to force them to pay. For example, right, you can say, hey, judge, I want you to fine so-and-so $100 a day for every day that they don't make the payment, right? So every day that goes by, they would be incurring that fine on top of what they already owe you, right? So at some point, the other person would just, if they have the money, they would just, pay you, right? Because they don't want to continue to be fined. That's civil contempt, right? Also civil contempt, let's say they didn't pay you, and as a result of that, you were late on your rent payment, let's say, and because you were late, your landlord fined you $250. So because of the fact that so and so didn't pay you your support obligation, you now incurred $250 in a penalty from your landlord. In my opinion, those are damages, right? You'd be able to ask for that with a civil contempt a motion for civil contempt. You were damaged because your spouse or your ex-spouse didn't pay you on time, and because of that you were damaged, and you should be able to be compensated for that through a civil motion for contempt. Let's switch gears though, and let's talk about criminal contempt, right? Criminal contempt is solely to penalize, right? It's basically, hey, judge, so-and-so didn't pay my support obligation. They violated your order. They need to be, penalized. They need to be, sanctioned. They need to be punished, essentially. And the court can, punish them in the form of making them pay your attorney's fees. The judge can make them pay a fine. The judge can, incarcerate them. That's like really extreme, but it can happen, right? And contempt, though, is a very real thing. Just to tell you guys a really quick story, I've seen contempt sort of get to be its very worst, right? Or not very worst, or the most extreme, right? I've seen it in the most extreme scenario. I got hired about, now it's been like a year and a half ago. Oh, no, about a year ago. A gentleman didn't want to pay his support obligation. It was proven in court that he had the money and he was just refusing not to pay. And when we got, before he hired me, after I evaluated it, I said, I could help you, but, I could probably just keep you out of jail. Really, the only defense was, I can keep you out of jail, but you have to pay your support obligation. And that's essentially what happened. Before court, I told him, bring a blank check. We got to court. He had his blank check. As soon as the judge knew what was going on, she looked at the bailiff and ordered that he, ordered the bailiff, put my client in handcuffs. And then at that point, I did the whole song and dance, trying desperately for my client not to be, brought to jail, right? Which, it looked like it was heading in that direction. Luckily, the judge, gave us a 15-minute recess. We went over to the computer. He transferred money from the one account to the other account. Why he didn't come to court with the money in the account that he had the check for is beyond me, but he was able to transfer the money, wrote the check, gave it to the other attorney, and we walked out. And he actually walked out of there, out the front door, not the back door to the jail. So, contempt is a very real thing. And in that case, that was more of an extreme case. And the attorney on the other side was not messing around, and she pulled every lever to enforce that support order. And guess what? It worked. He paid the money. The former wife, though, she had to, pay a substantial amount of money in attorney's fees to get to that point, which the judge ruled that my client had to pay. So it's real, right? If you don't pay your support obligations and you have it and you're just refusing not to pay it, it's real. You can definitely be forced to pay it. So I figured you guys like that story. If you like the podcast, please give it a 5-star review. I'd greatly appreciate it. If you have any questions about anything, always feel free to email me. My email is scott@kjlawfla.com. Again, scott@kjlawfla.com. If you guys like to work with us, right, on a divorce, paternity case, family law case, modification, prenup, postnup, give us a call. We'd be happy to work with you. We have 3 attorneys here, including myself. So we definitely have the manpower now to take on more cases. We're accepting new cases. Give us a call. My number is 561-208-1859. Again, 561-208-1859. All right, guys. Thanks and have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Florida Divorce Podcast. To learn the 10 secrets behind every successful divorce, visit floridadivorcepodcast.com. If you'd like Scott's help in your divorce case, go to kjlawfla.com.